It's probably the last place she would want to return to, but today Amanda Knox returned to an Italian courthouse where 16 years ago she was convicted of murdering her roommate before she was cleared a decade later. Facing new charges, she was mobbed by reporters today who got a little too close for comfort.
Amanda Knox is mobbed outside a court in Italy.
We want to say something to Italian people.
In the chaos, she is struck by a camera. She rubs her head and winces in pain. But there was even more pain in store when she heard the verdict of guilty of criminal slander. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesey covered the trial in Florence.
Most people thought that this was a formality, that she was going to be definitively off the hook and cleared of all accusations and charges against her, but that was not the case.
Amanda, once dubbed Foxy Knoxy, was the victim of a notorious miscarriage of justice in 2007 when she was wrongfully convicted by an Italian court of brutally murdering her roommate, Meredith Kercher. She first came under suspicion when she was videotaped canoodling with her then boyfriend close to the house where the body was found. She served 4 years of a 26-year sentence before an appeals court overturned her conviction. The case struck a chord worldwide. Hayden Panettiere played Amanda in a TV movie.
Amanda Marie Knox, guilty of the murder of her roommate Meredith Kercher, 26 years.
Now, 16 years later, Amanda returned to Italy accompanied by her husband to face another charge related to the case. A false statement she made while under police interrogation in 2007, in which she claimed this Congolese bartender was the killer.
She was sleep deprived. She'd been interrogated for more than 50 hours over the course of several days. And it was in this context, this traumatized, sleep deprived state, that, according to her, they used this to coerce a false accusation out of her.
Today, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But since she has already served longer than that on the murder charge, she was released.
Knox is appealing today's ruling. Meantime, an 8-hour limited Hulu series is in the works about what she's been through. Monica Lewinsky is one of the producers.
Joining me now, trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Maris to talk more about this case. Misty, good morning to you. I want to rewind just a little bit. Did she have to go to Italy to face these charges? Was she required to do so? I'd be pretty weary to head back there after everything she'd been through.
I can imagine that she was, and she said so much on her Twitter account where she said she's stepping back into the courtroom, which were essentially the darkest days of her life. So yes, she did have to go back and attend. She did testify, and she testified about how the police actually coerced that statement. It was after hours and hours and hours of being interrogated without an attorney, without an interpreter, that she was exhausted. And so the statement that accused the individual in this case was actually coerced. So it was very central to her defense in this slander charge to actually testify.
So when it comes to the psychology of false confessions, which it appears this was, how do you advise a client in a situation like this?
Well, number one is you always want to have a lawyer present. And that was actually the central issue in Amanda Knox's case that resulted in the overturning of her convictions, that the statements that she initially made to police were actually, the court had found that they had to be disregarded, that they couldn't be considered in a courtroom because she didn't have a lawyer and she did not have an interpreter. So the general principles are the same: to not make any statements without your lawyer present. And any defense attorney will tell you, when there are statements made to police, they're always scrutinized in order to make a determination about whether or not they were made under extreme emotional distress or something like that. So there's a bunch of evidentiary rules in the United States and also in Italy about whether or not those statements can be thrown out of court from an evidentiary perspective, which is ultimately what happened here.
I'm wondering if she won't face jail time for this and she wouldn't have found guilty, which has happened, what was the purpose of these legal proceedings if nothing really comes of it or changes anything?
So the conviction was overturned. The prosecutors decided to retry the case, and it was overturned based on new laws and the finding that those police statements were getting thrown out. And Amanda Knox wanted to clear her name finally from all of this because her conviction relating to the murder had been overturned. This was the only piece that was left without certainty. And so prosecutors still went forward because keep in mind, the standard is different. Overturning the murder conviction and clearing her name on the murder is different than the slander against the bartender who did suffer severe consequences, reputational aspects that were negative for him, spent 2 weeks in jail based on her statement. So it's two different legal standards. But what will come of this is while there is no jail time, she will be required to pay his legal fees and a sum of damages that will be determined by the court. So the court has 60 days to say why they came to this conclusion, to document their opinion, and to also identify what those damages are. Keep in mind, though, Marnie, she can still appeal this particular conviction.
And then after that, damages are determined. Anything else on the legal road for her as it pertains to the situation in Italy, or is this it?
Well, if she decides to appeal, then we're back into the process of that appellate decision. If the case were to be overturned, and again, the standards are pretty much the same. It's not that an appellate court looks at something and says they got it wrong. They look at what evidence came into the courtroom, what testimony was elicited. Was something overly prejudicial? Did something come in that shouldn't have come in from an evidentiary perspective? So if she appeals and if the appellate court overturns this conviction, we can find ourselves right back in this courtroom with another retrial. So it just depends on where the defense goes. Do they appeal the conviction? And I don't think they're going to make that assessment, at least according to her lawyers, until they see the rationale behind the opinion, which we'll get in 60 days.
Yeah, what a case. All right, well, not over yet. Trial attorney, legal analyst Misty Maris, thank you. You helped me understand it so much better. Appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Remember Amanda Knox? She may have been exonerated for murder nearly a decade ago, but just this morning, a Florentine court reconvicted her of slander for accusing an innocent man of killing her British roommate back in 2007. Knox was charged with falsely accusing her then boss, Patrick Lumumba, of the November 2007 stabbing death of Knox's British roommate, Meredith Kercher. Knox, her boyfriend, and another man whose DNA was found at the crime scene were all convicted of murder in 2009. However, Knox and her boyfriend's convictions were overturned by an Italian appellate court in 2011, and they were exonerated in 2015.
An Italian court has upheld a slander conviction against Amanda Knox. They said Knox wrongly accused the owner of the bar where she worked of killing her roommate back in 2007. Knox was an exchange student in Italy at the time. She spent nearly 4 years in prison for the murder before being acquitted in her second trial. Knox will not serve more time on the slander charge.
This morning, a shocking verdict for Amanda Knox, convicted for slander. An Italian court upholding a 16-year-old ruling. Knox had been trying to clear her name. Back in an Italian courtroom for the first time in almost 13 years. Her lawyer speaking to us moments later, saying she is too emotional to talk publicly for now.
Amanda is very upset. We're very surprised of the outcome of the decision.
This was her then, aged 20, hours after her roommate was murdered in the idyllic Italian town of Perugia. Today's case, another retrial. This time, Knox accused of slander for allegedly saying a bar owner took part in the murder. She later recanted, but the bar owner spending a few weeks in jail, though his alibi was established. Knox allegedly made the allegation during interrogation by Italian police following the murder. Meredith Kercher was found half naked with 40 stab wounds. Police searched the student's blood-stained apartment and soon arrested the American and Raffaele Sollecito, who she'd been dating for a week. They would spend 4 years behind bars, face 3 jury trials, and she would testify to being hit by police, her interrogation without a lawyer. One of the officers gave me a smack and said, "Remember, remember," she told the court today. She was finally freed and exonerated by Italy's highest court. The real killer, Rudy Guede, has served a 13-year sentence. But for Amanda Knox, no end to what she calls a nightmare.
What's your next step? Will you appeal? We have a right of appeal because this is a court of appeal decision. But before taking the decision, I'd like to read the motivation.
And guys, many folks watching will just be stunned that this continues. Remember, it happened back in 2007. Today, she was sentenced to 3 years in jail, a sentence she won't serve because, as I mentioned in the report there, she's already spent 4 years in jail here in Italy. She'll also have to pay legal fees, guys, and also compensation.
All right, Keir, thank you.
Well, now for more on this decision and the fallout, we bring in our NBC senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. Laura, good morning to you.
Hi, guys.
We were all just talking about the fact that this captivated the nation for so long, but now, as Keir just says, even though she's convicted of slander, she won't serve any jail time?
Right. So she already served the 4 years behind bars for the murder. She was exonerated for the murder of her roommate.
Right.
And because she already served that time, she gets the benefit of that for this 3-year sentence. So it's time served. She should have to compensate the man that she wrongfully pointed as the person who was behind it. But who knows if he's ever going to be able to collect that? Like, he already had a judgment against her, and he's never seen a penny of that money.
Wow.
And she's about to go back to the United States. So it's unlikely that he's going to be able to collect on that easily, at least.
So let's talk about why this is happening now, because to Keir's point, the murder itself happened back in 2007. It's been 15 years. Why does this case continue to be in the spotlight?
Because appeals take forever. And this has been going on, and especially in LA, it's been going on and on for years. She's appealed it numerous times on the murder piece of it, and the slander piece of it was upheld. That's why we're doing this all over again, because it was the retrial to see whether she would be reconvicted on that. But she could have easily tried to appeal this one too, Craig. So this might not be the end of the road for her, but she had hoped that this was sort of going to end everything, and she'd be sort of relieved of this cloud that's been hanging over her. Obviously, that did not happen
For
today.
so long. So what happens to the man that she accused of murdering her roommate? I mean, he's the victim of slander.
Yeah, he actually had to go to jail for 2 weeks because of what she said. Now, he was ultimately cleared, obviously. He's moved out of Italy. He lives in Poland, I now believe. So he's essentially moved on with his life at this point. And like I said, I don't know whether he would want to go through the process of actually trying to get any money from her. But the media attention around this, like, we all remember covering this, right? Everyone remembers
People were judging her. Look at her. Look at her face. Right? You know, people were just, they were all into it.
Yeah, well, because there was so much attention around how it actually happened. The murder itself was really grisly.
Gruesome,
Remember all of the sort of hoopla around it? And it was also sort of the zeitgeist of the times, like Oscar Pistorius. All of these cases kind of just took over. And so I think that's why there's been so much attention towards this, even though this is about the slander, not the murder.
Right. So is this it?
I think this is probably the end of the road. I think now, at this point, do you really want to go through the cost of another appeal? Your name has been cleared as it relates to the murder. This might be the end, finally.
Okay. All right. Well, solid as always.
Thank you.
Anytime, guys.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't miss the Today Show every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific on our streaming channel, Today All Day. To watch, head to today.com/allday or click the link right here.
An Italian court reconvicted Amanda Knox of slander today after she was exonerated in the 2007 murder of her British roommate while the two were exchange students in Italy. An Italian court sentencing her to 3 years in prison. Knox admitting she wrongly accused the owner of the bar where she worked part-time while studying abroad in Italy. She says she was under pressure from police and had no way of knowing who the killer was. Knox discussed the slander charge on her podcast Labyrinths back in December.
My argument is that I was coerced into signing those statements, and I never intended to implicate myself or others in a crime that I didn't commit.
The motivation behind the court's decision will be released in 60 days, and from there, Knox's lawyer says they'll decide if they'll appeal that slander conviction.
New this morning, an Italian court reconvicted a Seattle woman, Amanda Knox, this time for slander. The case centers around a conviction for wrongly accusing a bar owner of the 2007 murder of Knox's British roommate while the two were exchange students in Italy. She spent almost 4 years in an Italian prison before she was exonerated for the crime. Today, the court ruled Knox will not serve any more jail time given the 3-year sentence counts as time already served.
And now we have breaking news just into the newsroom. Seattle resident Amanda Knox lost a court fight that she hoped would clear her name once and for all. An Italian court reconvicted Knox of slander just a few hours ago. Knox was exonerated in the brutal 2007 murder of her British roommate while the two were exchange students in Italy. But even though she was cleared of the murder, the court found that Knox had wrongly accused an innocent man. The case centered on two statements Knox signed after she was questioned by investigators, where she accused a bar owner of the killing. Last year, Knox talked exclusively to King 5's Joyce Taylor. She said a police officer impersonated a translator and interrogators bullied her into a confession.
They would hit me in the back of the head. I believed them at a certain point that I must have amnesia, that I must be scared and broken, because I felt scared and broken, and they got me to sign statements that implicated myself and others in a crime that we had nothing to do with.
At the time of her interrogation, Knox says she barely spoke Italian. More than a decade later, she spoke it fluently today to tell the court that the interrogation was her worst nightmare. Even though she was reconvicted, Knox will not serve any more jail time because of time already served. Knox's lawyer told reporters that he was surprised, and Amanda is very upset by the decision.
New this morning, Amanda Knox has been reconvicted of slander in Italy for accusing an innocent man in her roommate's 2007 murder. But Knox will not serve any jail time because her 3-year sentence counts as time already served. She returned to an Italian courtroom today for the first time in 12 years. The court found that she wrongly accused Patrick Lumumba in the killing of Meredith Kercher. Knox was exonerated of that murder after flip-flop verdicts and more than 8 years of legal proceedings.
Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more great ABC7 content by clicking the subscribe button for our YouTube channel. And download the ABC7 Los Angeles streaming app on Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, and Roku to watch on your TV.
A stunning twist in a sensational murder case that once sent shockwaves all around the world. Amanda Knox back on trial for the first time in more than 12 years and will have to defend herself. We all remember when Knox was convicted in 2009, along with her then boyfriend, for killing her 21-year-old roommate. Those convictions were eventually overturned, reinstated, and then overturned again in a series of trials over the ensuing years. Well, now Knox is trying to clear one final legal hurdle, a slander charge against her for wrongly accusing a bar owner of that murder. NewsNation's Brooke Schaefer is following this case, joins us live. So, Brooke, Knox is returning to the same courtroom where she was reconvicted.
Amanda Knox this week will head back to a familiar courtroom in Italy, Nicole, this time defending herself against a slander charge. The now 36-year-old posted on X that on June 5th, I'll walk into the very same courtroom where I was reconvicted of a crime I didn't commit, this time to defend myself yet again. I hope to clear my name once and for all of the false charges against me. Amanda Knox this week hopes to get rid of a 16-year-old slander conviction, one that she received after falsely accusing a Congolese bar owner in the brutal murder of her roommate in Italy back in 2007. A European court ruled investigators violated Knox's human rights at the time during a long night of questioning. Knox has said that she made those statements against the bar owner under pressures of stress, shock, and extreme exhaustion. A verdict in the slander case retrial is expected tomorrow. It's the latest legal hurdle for Amanda Knox, once arrested alongside her then boyfriend for the murder of her roommate, who was then 21 years old. She and Knox were exchange students in Italy back in 2007. The case, as you mentioned, Nicole, grabbed worldwide attention. Italian investigators ultimately, though, arrested a man from the Ivory Coast whose DNA was found at the crime scene. Knox and her then boyfriend exonerated in 2015.
You saved my life, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to have my life back.
So Amanda Knox, now a mom of two, will be back in an Italian courtroom for the first time in over a decade. Writing online, wish me luck. Nicole?
All right. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
An Italian court has upheld a slander conviction against Amanda Knox. Knox is the American college student who spent 4 years in jail for the 2007 murder of her roommate before she was cleared of the crime. The slander charge stems from her falsely accusing her boss at the time of the killing. CBC's Megan Williams is on the story for us and joins us now live from Rome. So Megan, let's talk about Amanda Knox, who is hoping to put an end to this 17-year legal ordeal by exonerating herself today. Tell us what happened in court.
That's right, Natasha. It was a strange deja vu because I covered that case 17 years ago in Italy. It was where Amanda Knox, an American college student, she was 20 at the time, accused of killing Meredith Kercher, her British roommate. They did find the culprit of the murder, who was a local man who has come out of prison recently. He did his time. But at the time, the prosecution came out with a very far-fetched theory that Amanda killed her roommate in a sexual threesome, and that turned into a feeding frenzy for the tabloids. So Amanda Knox and her boyfriend at the time, Raffaele Sollecito, were found guilty at first. They spent 4 years in prison, and then they were eventually exonerated by Italy's highest court. But when Knox was first contacted by the police, she says she was put under terrible pressure and physically abused by some of the police officers to name her boss, who is an African man, an African-Italian man, as the person who murdered Meredith Kercher. So she was found guilty of slander against her former boss and is back in Italy 17 years later. She was hoping to explain to the court that she made that statement under pressure, but the court didn't buy it, it seems. They'll give their reasoning in about 60 days, but they had upheld that guilty verdict of slander against Amanda Knox.
And my understanding is this doesn't really count for anything because she's already served time in prison. So does that mean this is the end of the Amanda Knox saga?
No, you're right. I mean, she's served that time in prison, so it doesn't have any practical implications for her, but she's trying to clear her name. She says that after she was interrogated that first night by police 17 years ago, she was exhausted. As I say, she said she was physically abused, she was slapped. And the next morning, she wrote a note reneging what she had said about her boss. And she said later on that her boss was a friend. He'd been very supportive of her, so she apologized to him. But they're going to appeal this case. Her defense lawyer today said that they'll take this to Italy's highest court because they want the fact that, what Amanda Knox is saying, that she was coerced into the statement. They want that recognized, and they want the slander conviction overturned.
CBC's Megan Williams in Rome. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks.
Amanda Knox failed in her bid to clear her name today as an Italian court reconvicted her of slander. Knox has been sentenced to 3 years for wrongly accusing a bar owner in the 2007 murder of her roommate, British student Meredith Kercher. She later recanted, but the bar owner spent a few weeks in jail, even though his alibi had been established already. Knox later spent 4 years in jail for the killing of Kercher, but was eventually cleared along with his former Italian boyfriend. While the 3-year sentence in this slander case was upheld, Knox will not serve any more jail time, as it counts as time already served. Knox lawyers said that he was very surprised at the outcome of this decision, adding that Knox is, quote, very upset.
We recognize the decision, we accept the decision, but we're looking forward to understand exactly what are the motivation behind, which, as I said, will be available after 60 days. After the reading of the motivation, we will take the necessary new steps.
In Italy this morning, Amanda Knox tried and failed to wipe away one last charge related to a murder case. It goes back 17 years now. The 36-year-old American woman returned to court in Florence asking for a slander conviction to be removed from her record, but a jury said no. Knox has already been convicted and then cleared of murder charges. Chris Livesay was in court for today's hearing. Chris, good morning to you. A lot of people were surprised she returned to Italy during this time.
That's right, Gail. Good morning to you. Amanda Knox is once again guilty in the eyes of the Italian justice system. It's an odyssey that began with the 2007 murder of her British roommate Meredith Kercher when both were studying abroad in Italy. At just 20 years old, the college student from Seattle had barely started learning Italian when she had to fumble through hours of grueling interrogation, often without a competent interpreter or her lawyer present. It was in this traumatized state, she says, that she was coerced by police to falsely identify her boss at the time as a suspect. And for that misstep, she was convicted of slander in 2009, and that verdict was upheld today. Now, before the verdict, she apologized profusely, sometimes emotionally, for, quote, not being strong enough during that interrogation. Looking back, that slander charge was a mere footnote in a trial that led to a bombshell conviction for murder for Knox and her boyfriend at the time. She's now been sentenced to 3 years behind bars, but that's time she's already served before she and her boyfriend were acquitted in 2015 of murder. But that slander conviction, it now still stands, and her lawyers say she will she will appeal, rather. Vlad?
All right, Chris Livesay in Italy, thank you very much.
Amanda Knox convicted just moments ago inside an Italian courtroom this morning. The 16-year-old slander case stems from the night she was interrogated about a roommate's murder. Our foreign correspondent James Longman is there in Florence, Italy, with the very latest. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, Robin. A shock decision this morning. Amanda Knox came here to clear her name, but she has just been convicted by this court of slander, of implicating another person in the murder of Meredith Kercher. She has been sentenced to 3 years, though she will not serve any of that time, given how much time she has already spent in jail. Her team says she'll appeal. This morning, Amanda Knox facing another guilty verdict in an Italian courtroom. She was fighting yet again to clear her name once and for all.
You want to say something?
But this time, a 16-year-old slander conviction upheld, stemming from the murder case of her British roommate Meredith Kercher. In an emotional 10-minute speech before the verdict, Knox telling the court why she wrote the note at the centre of the trial, at times trembling. Her lawyer speaking after the verdict.
You must be in shock today.
Yes, of course, this decision came with a big surprise. We were looking for having a dismissal, and we don't know exactly what is the logic behind this decision.
Knox was accused of pinning the killing on a Congolese bar owner who she worked for part-time while studying abroad in Italy. The accusation based on 2 statements she signed while in police custody for Kercher's murder. The now 36-year-old wife and mother of 2 discussed the slander charge on her podcast, Labyrinth, last December.
My argument is that I was coerced into signing those statements, and I never intended to implicate myself or others in a crime that I didn't commit.
Kercher's death spiraled into an international media frenzy back in 2007. Knox and her former boyfriend, Raffaele Solicito, were accused of murder, a crime for which she was wrongfully convicted and spent almost 4 years in an Italian prison. Italian authorities are also charging and convicting Rudy Guede for the murder in 2008. He'd come to Italy as a child from the Ivory Coast. His DNA was found at the scene. In 2015, both Knox and Solicito had their convictions overturned.
Amanda Knox being found guilty means that final blemish, after a long saga of being found guilty and then ultimately exonerated in a brutal murder of her then British roommate, will remain. That even though the slanderous statements were found not admissible, that the prosecution found a way to still uphold the conviction.
Now, Rudy Guede was the man convicted of the murder of Meredith Kercher. He spent 13 years in jail of a 16-year sentence. He was released in 2021, but he's under enhanced surveillance. He's wearing a tag because he's been accused by his ex-girlfriend of abuse. As for Amanda Knox, well, this saga just continues. Guys.
Now, quite a turn of events. All right, James Longman for us. Thank you.
Amanda Knox's legal team is vowing to appeal after she was convicted of slander in an Italian courtroom today. The 16-year-old case stems from the night the American was interrogated about her roommate's murder. Foreign correspondent James Longman is in Florence, Italy, with the latest.
Amanda Knox facing another guilty verdict in an Italian courtroom. She was fighting yet again to clear her name once and for all.
We want to say something.
But this time, a 16-year-old slander conviction upheld, stemming from the murder case of her British roommate Meredith Kercher. In an emotional 10-minute speech before the verdict, Knox telling the court why she wrote the note at the centre of the trial, at times trembling. Her lawyer speaking after the verdict.
You must be in shock today.
Yes, of course, this decision came with a big surprise. We were looking for having a dismissal, and we don't know exactly what is the logic behind this decision.
Knox was accused of pinning the killing on a Congolese bar owner who she worked for part-time while studying abroad in Italy. The accusation based on 2 statements she signed while in police custody for Kercher's murder. The now 36-year-old wife and mother of 2 discussed the slander charge on her podcast, Labyrinth, last December.
My argument is that I was coerced into signing those statements, and I never intended to implicate myself or others in a crime that I didn't commit.
Kercher's death spiraled into an international media frenzy back in 2007. Knox and her former boyfriend, Raffaele Solicito, were accused of murder, a crime for which she was wrongfully convicted and spent almost 4 years in an Italian prison. Italian authorities are also charging and convicting Rudy Guede for the murder in 2008. He'd come to Italy as a child from the Ivory Coast. His DNA was found at the scene. In 2015, both Knox and Solicito had their convictions overturned.
Amanda Knox being found guilty means that final blemish, after a long saga of being found guilty and then ultimately exonerated in a brutal murder of her then British roommate, will remain. That even though the slanderous statements were found not admissible, that the prosecution found a way to still uphold the conviction.
Now, Rudy Guede was the man convicted of the murder of Meredith Kercher. He spent 13 years in jail of a 16-year term. He was released in 2021, but he's under enhanced surveillance. He's wearing a tag, facing abuse allegations from his ex-girlfriend. As for Amanda Knox, the saga continues. Diane?
All right, James Longman, thank you.
Well, let's bring you some breaking news now. And Amanda Knox has failed to overturn her historic slander conviction in an Italian court today. Joining me now is our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, with the details. So she's tried before and today she's failed to overturn her conviction.
Yes, that's right. A very dramatic day in court for Amanda Knox. She'd been in court fighting this accusation of slander. Now, this relates to an accusation that she made during police questioning over the murder of British student Meredith Kercher, who, of course, was found stabbed to death in 2007. Now, you'll remember that initially Amanda Knox and her boyfriend were found guilty of that murder. They were later cleared, totally exonerated of it in 2015. But this final legal case has been hanging over her because during police questioning following the murder, she accused a Congolese bar owner of committing that crime. And after that, she was accused of slander. Now, a European court said that the police questioning during that point where she signed 2 police statements making this allegation against this bar owner had infringed her human rights. And because of that, an Italian Court of Appeal overturned the initial slander conviction. So the case was retried, and today she was hoping to be cleared. And ahead of the verdict today, she addressed the court in a written statement saying, "I'm sorry that I was not strong enough to resist the pressure of police. I didn't know who the murderer was. I had no way of knowing." And the court had been told to ignore those 2 signed statements and focus purely on a statement that she made in the days afterwards, saying that she'd been under intense pressure, that she hadn't been given an interpreter, for example, is what the European court found, that she hadn't been given legal advice at that point, and saying to only focus on this other statement that she'd made where she said that she couldn't fully stand by what she'd said. Well, it seems that the jury and the judges have upheld the original conviction of slander. They have sentenced her to 3 years. The reality of that is that that sentence has already been served, so she won't be going back to jail. But a very difficult day for Amanda Knox, who was hoping this would be the end, the final legal stain to be removed.
The American woman Amanda Knox, who was convicted and then cleared of murdering her British roommate, has been sentenced to 3 years in prison for slander in a retrial. She's been convicted of falsely implicating a man in the murder of Meredith Kercher in Italy 17 years ago. Despite today's sentencing, Ms. Knox will not go to prison for the conviction. She has already served 4 years for murder before being acquitted. Live to Rome, let's speak to our reporter there, Davide Giglione, who is there. Davide, tell us what happened in court today and the significance of this moment.
Yes, Lucy, we were just listening to Amanda Knox's lawyers who came out straight after the judge read the verdict, and they said that their client, Amanda Knox, was extremely disappointed because she was hoping to clear her name once and for all. Obviously, she wasn't being this trial was not about the murder because she's been acquitted. She was acquitted for that in 2015. But the slander trial was now taking place in Florence after she was previously accused, and then there was a retrial. So it's all very legally complicated. This legal battle started back in 2007 when a British student, Meredith Kercher, was murdered, and she was Amanda Knox's flatmate. Then Amanda Knox was accused and convicted, found guilty first of the murder. Then she was acquitted. Then she was found guilty again. Then she was acquitted once and for all for the murder in 2015. Now, this is a separate trial for the slander because when she was interrogated 4 days after the murder, she accused another man who was not involved of the murder of Kercher, and she wrote his name on a piece of paper. Today, during the trial, she read a spontaneous statement in Italian where she basically accused Italian police back in the day of treating her badly. She said she was confused, and she said that that was the worst night of her entire life, and she was hoping to be acquitted. Obviously, now lawyers said that they will wait for the motivation for the sentence, which will be published within the next 60 days, and they will probably appeal.